Detective Mark Turner had always been known for his ability to adapt to any situation, but this assignment would test his limits like never before. As he stood in the dimly lit room, surrounded by surveillance photos and maps, he couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation mixed with a hint of anxiety. The time had come for him to delve into the high-stakes world of undercover police work. Mark had been handpicked for a mission that would take him deep into the heart of a dangerous criminal organization. It was an assignment that carried immense risks, but the potential rewards were equally significant. The criminal group he was tasked with infiltrating was responsible for a slew of major crimes, from drug trafficking to money laundering, and bringing them down would be a significant victory for law enforcement. The details of Mark's new identity had been carefully crafted. He would assume the persona of Mark Sullivan, a slick, up-and-coming criminal looking to expand his network and make a name for himself in the criminal underworld. He would need to gain the trust of the organization's key players, a group of hardened criminals who had grown wary of outsiders. As Mark began to immerse himself in his new persona, he couldn't help but reflect on the sacrifices this mission would entail. He had a family, a wife and 2 young children, who would be kept in the dark about his true whereabouts and the danger he was facing. Maintaining the facade of a criminal while keeping his family safe would be the ultimate test of his abilities. The first step in the infiltration process was to establish contact with a low-level member of the criminal organization. Mark's connections within law enforcement had provided him with a lead, a bar frequented by some of the group's foot soldiers. It was a gritty establishment on the outskirts of town, a place where deals were made in the shadows. With his cover story memorized and a new wardrobe to match his character, Mark headed to the bar, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. He couldn't afford to make mistakes, and every word he spoke had to be carefully calculated. Inside the dimly lit bar, he ordered a drink and made casual conversation with the bartender, hoping to glean information about the organization's members. It didn't take long for Mark to strike up a conversation with a man who seemed to fit the profile of a low-level operative. Their conversation was guarded, filled with veiled references and insinuations. Mark's years of training in undercover work allowed him to navigate the delicate dance of deception with ease. He carefully dropped hints about his own criminal aspirations, testing the waters to see if the man would take the bait. After hours of conversation, the man finally extended an invitation, an opportunity to meet with some of the organization's members in a more private setting. Mark had succeeded in gaining his trust, but this was just the beginning of a perilous journey into the criminal underworld. As Mark left the bar that night, he knew that the true infiltration had only just begun. The criminal organization's secrets were buried deep, and he was determined to unearth them. It was a mission that would push him to his limits, challenge his principles, and test the boundaries of his own identity. But Detective Mark Turner was no stranger to the shadows, and he was ready to embrace the darkness to bring the criminals to justice. The infiltration had begun, and the fate of the criminal organization hung in the balance. As the days turned into weeks, Detective Mark Turner found himself navigating the treacherous terrain of a double life. Under the guise of Mark Sullivan, the aspiring criminal, he delved deeper into the criminal organization he had infiltrated. His morning still began with the familiar routine of a husband and father, making breakfast for his children, kissing his wife goodbye, and promising to be home for dinner. But as soon as he stepped out of his front door, he left that world behind, entering a realm of deception and danger. Mark's undercover operation demanded complete commitment. He spent his days immersed in the criminal underworld, meeting with shady characters, and participating in conversations that would have turned his stomach in any other context. He was no longer just an observer, he had become an active participant in a world of illegal deals and covert transactions. Maintaining his cover was a constant struggle. He had to strike a balance between building trust within the criminal organization and ensuring that his true identity remained hidden from his newfound associates. Each interaction, each decision, was a delicate dance on the tightrope of deception. The toll on Mark's personal life was becoming evident. His wife, Sarah, began to notice the changes in him, his distant gaze, his late nights, and his secrecy. She was growing increasingly concerned, sensing that something was amiss, but unable to put her finger on it. One evening, after Mark had returned home late yet again, Sarah confronted him. Her eyes filled with worry as she pleaded for him to open up and share what was burdening him. Mark was torn between his duty to protect his family and his commitment to the mission. He offered vague explanations, leaving Sarah feeling even more confused and hurt. The strain on Mark's marriage was just one of the many challenges he faced. The criminals he was embedded with were growing more suspicious, and the stakes were higher than ever. He was now privy to their inner workings, their plans for illegal activities, and their distrust of outsiders. To maintain his cover, Mark had to walk a tightrope of deceit and moral ambiguity. He found himself making decisions that conflicted with his own sense of right and wrong. The blurred lines between reality and pretense were taking a toll on his conscience. Yet, he knew there was no turning back. The mission was too critical, the criminal organization too dangerous. Mark had a duty to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. He couldn't afford to let his true identity be exposed. The safety of his family depended on it. As Mark continued to navigate this perilous double life, he couldn't help but wonder how long he could maintain the charade. The lines between Mark Sullivan, the aspiring criminal, and Detective Mark Turner, the dedicated law enforcement officer, were becoming increasingly blurred. The world of undercover police work was taking its toll, and Mark was beginning to question if he would ever be able to find his way back to the life he once knew. As Detective Mark Turner's double life continued, the criminal organization began to accept him as one of their own. Mark Sullivan, as they knew him, had ingratiated himself within their ranks, earning their trust, albeit with a growing sense of unease. Inside the clandestine world of the organization, Mark witnessed the inner workings of a criminal empire that operated with ruthless efficiency. Meetings were held in dimly lit backrooms, hushed conversations carried the weight of illegal transactions, and trust was a rare and precious commodity. Mark's interactions with key members of the organization deepened. He grew close to some, forming bonds that blurred the lines between pretense and reality. He found himself participating in criminal activities, a necessary evil to maintain his cover, but each action chipped away at his moral compass. The organization's hierarchy was complex, and Mark had to tread carefully. The second-in-command, a shrewd and calculating figure named Victor, began to show particular interest in Mark Sullivan. Victor had a reputation for being both ruthless and discerning, and his trust was not easily earned. Mark's relationship with Victor became pivotal to his mission. He was privy to discussions about future criminal endeavors, plans to expand the organization's reach, and the smuggling of illicit goods. Mark knew that gathering evidence against Victor and the higher-ups was crucial to bringing down the entire operation. However, the closer Mark got to Victor, the greater the risk of betrayal became. He was constantly on edge, aware that the smallest slip or hint of deception could expose his true identity. The price of maintaining trust was to further entangle himself in criminal activities, compromising his own principles in the process. As the days turned into weeks, Mark's sense of isolation deepened. He missed his family, his true identity, and the world outside of the criminal organization's grasp. He longed for the simplicity of his life before the mission, but there was no turning back now. One evening, during a clandestine meeting with Victor and other high-ranking members, Mark's loyalty was put to the test. Victor proposed a plan that involved a risky and potentially deadly operation. Mark knew that participating in it would further implicate him in criminal activities, but declining the offer could arouse suspicion. With his heart pounding, Mark agreed to take part in the operation. It was a moment of profound moral compromise, a step deeper into the abyss of deception. He knew that his actions were necessary to gather the evidence needed to dismantle the organization, but the toll on his conscience was immeasurable. As he left the meeting, Mark couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The line between undercover detective and criminal operative had become dangerously thin. The world of trust and betrayal had blurred into a nightmarish gray area, and Mark was caught in its unforgiving grip. As Detective Mark Turner continued to navigate the treacherous waters of the criminal organization, each day brought new challenges and heart-stopping moments. The line between his undercover persona, Mark Sullivan, and his true identity had blurred to a dangerous degree, and the risk of exposure loomed ever larger. One of the defining characteristics of an undercover operation was the constant dance with danger, and Mark had become a master at it. He had narrowly escaped discovery on numerous occasions, his instincts and quick thinking serving as his most valuable allies. One particularly tense evening, during a covert meeting with Victor and other high-ranking members, Mark's heart raced as he realized he had left behind a crucial piece of evidence, a notebook containing incriminating information. It was a perilous situation, but Mark couldn't afford to let that evidence fall into the wrong hands. With nerves of steel, he excused himself from the meeting, feigning illness. Victor's piercing gaze followed him as he left the room, and Mark could feel the weight of suspicion bearing down on him. Alone in a dimly lit hallway, he retrieved the notebook and breathed a sigh of relief, but the close call left him shaken. The organization's activities became increasingly dangerous, and Mark found himself participating in activities that tested the limits of his resolve. He was involved in a high-stakes drug transaction, posing as a key player in the criminal underworld. The tension was palpable as the exchange unfolded, and Mark knew that a single wrong move could lead to disaster. Another heart-pounding moment came when he was assigned to accompany a group of criminals on a smuggling operation. The risks were monumental, with law enforcement agencies hot on the organization's trail. Mark had to rely on his training and instincts to avoid capture, knowing that one mistake could reveal his true identity. The constant exposure to danger was taking its toll on Mark's mental and emotional well-being. He couldn't confide in anyone about the emotional turmoil he was experiencing, the guilt of compromising his principles, the fear of discovery, and the yearning for his family. One evening, after narrowly evading a police raid during a criminal gathering, Mark found himself alone in a dimly lit alley, overwhelmed by a sense of isolation and despair. He knew he had to find a way to cope with the psychological toll of the mission, or it would consume him. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he reached out to his mentor within the police force, revealing the immense pressure he was under. The mentor provided guidance and support, reminding Mark of the mission's importance and the lives at stake. It was a lifeline in a sea of darkness, a reminder of the greater purpose behind his actions. As weeks turned into months, Mark continued to walk the tightrope between trust and betrayal, navigating the criminal organization's perilous world. The close calls and narrow escapes only served to heighten the tension, and Mark knew that the mission was far from over. The path to bringing down the criminal empire remained fraught with danger, and he was determined to see it through to its conclusion, no matter the cost. The pressure had been steadily building, and Detective Mark Turner could feel the weight of his double life bearing down on him. He had entered the criminal organization as Mark Sullivan, a character of his own creation, but the lines between pretense and reality had blurred beyond recognition. Each day, Mark found himself immersed in criminal activities that conflicted with his moral compass. The constant compromises he had to make had left him with a growing sense of guilt and self-loathing. He had become an active participant in a world of illegal deals and treacherous alliances, and the cost to his own sense of right and wrong was immeasurable. One evening, as Mark prepared to meet with Victor and other high-ranking members of the organization, he reached a breaking point. The mission had become an emotional and psychological crucible, and he could no longer ignore the moral quagmire he was wading through. In the dimly lit room where the meeting was to take place, Mark sat in silence, his inner turmoil threatening to consume him. He had a decision to make: continue down this dark path, compromising his own principles for the sake of the mission, or take a stand and risk exposing his true identity. As Victor outlined the organization's next criminal endeavor, Mark felt a mounting sense of revulsion. The operation was not only illegal but potentially lethal, putting innocent lives at risk. Mark knew that participating in it would go against everything he stood for as a law enforcement officer. In a moment of profound moral clarity, Mark made a choice. He could no longer play the role of a criminal without betraying his own sense of justice. With trembling hands, he interrupted Victor's briefing, voicing his concerns and objections. The room fell into stunned silence as all eyes turned to Mark. It was a bold and dangerous move, one that could expose his true identity and result in dire consequences. But he couldn't stand by and allow the criminal organization to carry out its deadly plans. Victor's expression darkened, his suspicions growing. He questioned Mark's loyalty and motives, demanding an explanation. Mark knew that his cover was at its most fragile point, but he had reached his breaking point. With unwavering resolve, Mark revealed his true identity as Detective Mark Turner, a dedicated law enforcement officer. He recounted the months of deception and the sacrifices he had made for the sake of the mission. He made it clear that he could no longer be a willing participant in the criminal activities of the organization. The room erupted into chaos as criminal members reacted to the shocking revelation. Some were furious, others bewildered, and a few contemplated fleeing. Victor, however, saw Mark's betrayal as an act of defiance that could not go unpunished. A tense standoff ensued as Mark and Victor locked eyes in a battle of wills. Mark knew that he had taken an enormous risk, and the consequences were uncertain. But he had reached his breaking point, and he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 6: The Sting Operation. The revelation of Detective Mark Turner's true identity sent shockwaves through the criminal organization. The room crackled with tension as the criminals grappled with the betrayal they had just witnessed. For Victor, the second-in-command, this was a situation that demanded swift and ruthless action. Victor's cold, calculating eyes bore into Mark, his face a mask of fury and determination. The criminal organization's secrets were at risk of being exposed, and Mark had become an existential threat. But Mark had taken this gamble, knowing that there was no turning back. In a swift, chaotic sequence of events, Victor barked orders to his subordinates. It became evident that Mark's life was in immediate danger. His fellow officers in the surveillance team, who had been monitoring the meeting from a concealed location, knew that they had to act quickly to prevent a disaster. As Mark stood his ground, facing the wrath of Victor and the hostile criminals, law enforcement units converged on the location. It was time for the sting operation, the culmination of months of careful planning and surveillance. The police moved with precision, surrounding the building and sealing off all escape routes. Negotiators were on standby, hoping to defuse the volatile situation through dialogue. Mark's life hung in the balance, and the tension was palpable. Inside the room, Victor's fury had turned to desperation as he realized that escape was impossible. Mark, fully aware of the risks he had taken, maintained his composure, knowing that the operation was now in the hands of his fellow officers. Negotiations began, but Victor remained defiant. He refused to surrender, vowing to fight to the death rather than face capture and imprisonment. It became clear that a peaceful resolution was unlikely. The standoff intensified, and the hours passed in agonizing tension. Mark's undercover mission had brought him to this precipice, and he faced the consequences of his bold revelation. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome remained uncertain. Finally, as the night wore on, a breakthrough came. A member of the criminal organization, recognizing the futility of resistance, decided to cooperate with the authorities. This insider's information provided a key advantage to the law enforcement team. With this newfound intelligence, the police executed a well-coordinated operation to breach the room where Mark and the criminals were holed up. A flurry of flashbangs and tear gas filled the air as the tactical team stormed the room. Amid the chaos, Mark was separated from Victor and the remaining criminals. The sting operation had succeeded in capturing the majority of the criminal organization's members, including Victor himself. But Mark's fate remained uncertain. As he was led away from the scene in handcuffs, Mark knew that the operation had brought down a significant portion of the criminal empire he had infiltrated. Justice had been served, but at a tremendous cost. The sting operation marked a turning point in Mark's journey as an undercover officer. It was a moment of reckoning, a culmination of months of deception, sacrifice, and risk. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: his actions had made an indelible mark on the criminal organization and the world of undercover police work. The revelation of Detective Mark Turner's true identity sent shockwaves through the criminal organization. The room crackled with tension as the criminals grappled with the betrayal they had just witnessed. For Victor, the second-in-command, this was a situation that demanded swift and ruthless action. Victor's cold, calculating eyes bore into Mark, his face a mask of fury and determination. The criminal organization's secrets were at risk of being exposed, and Mark had become an existential threat. But Mark had taken this gamble, knowing that there was no turning back. In a swift, chaotic sequence of events, Victor barked orders to his subordinates. It became evident that Mark's life was in immediate danger. His fellow officers in the surveillance team, who had been monitoring the meeting from a concealed location, knew that they had to act quickly to prevent a disaster. As Mark stood his ground, facing the wrath of Victor and the hostile criminals, law enforcement units converged on the location. It was time for the sting operation, the culmination of months of careful planning and surveillance. The police moved with precision, surrounding the building and sealing off all escape routes. Negotiators were on standby, hoping to defuse the volatile situation through dialogue. Mark's life hung in the balance, and the tension was palpable. Inside the room, Victor's fury had turned to desperation as he realized that escape was impossible. Mark, fully aware of the risks he had taken, maintained his composure, knowing that the operation was now in the hands of his fellow officers. Negotiations began, but Victor remained defiant. He refused to surrender, vowing to fight to the death rather than face capture and imprisonment. It became clear that a peaceful resolution was unlikely. The standoff intensified, and the hours passed in agonizing tension. Mark's undercover mission had brought him to this precipice, and he faced the consequences of his bold revelation. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome remained uncertain. Finally, as the night wore on, a breakthrough came. A member of the criminal organization, recognizing the futility of resistance, decided to cooperate with the authorities. This insider's information provided a key advantage to the law enforcement team. With this newfound intelligence, the police executed a well-coordinated operation to breach the room where Mark and the criminals were holed up. A flurry of flashbangs and tear gas filled the air as the tactical team stormed the room. Amid the chaos, Mark was separated from Victor and the remaining criminals. The sting operation had succeeded in capturing the majority of the criminal organization's members, including Victor himself. But Mark's fate remained uncertain. As he was led away from the scene in handcuffs, Mark knew that the operation had brought down a significant portion of the criminal empire he had infiltrated. Justice had been served, but at a tremendous cost. The sting operation marked a turning point in Mark's journey as an undercover officer. It was a moment of reckoning, a culmination of months of deception, sacrifice, and risk. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: his actions had made an indelible mark on the criminal organization and the world of undercover police work. As the dust settled from the intense sting operation, Detective Mark Turner found himself in a state of both physical and emotional exhaustion. The room where he had faced Victor and the other criminals was now empty, the remnants of the standoff scattered across the floor. Law enforcement officers worked diligently to secure the captured criminals, collecting evidence and ensuring their arrest. Mark, however, was separated from the criminals he had infiltrated. He stood in the cold, dimly lit hallway, the handcuffs on his wrists serving as a stark reminder of his own precarious situation. He had willingly revealed his true identity to bring down the organization, but the consequences of his actions were far from certain. As he waited, Mark couldn't help but reflect on the toll the undercover operation had taken on him. He had become a different person over the course of his mission, a criminal by pretense, but still a law enforcement officer at heart. The moral compromises he had made haunted him, and the weight of his choices was a heavy burden. The sting operation had been a success, capturing the majority of the criminal organization's members, including Victor. The evidence collected during the operation was enough to ensure convictions and dismantle the criminal empire. It was a significant victory for law enforcement, but it came at a cost. Mark's fellow officers, who had orchestrated the sting operation and rushed to his aid, now surrounded him. They understood the sacrifice he had made and the risks he had taken, and their expressions held a mixture of gratitude and concern. In the aftermath of the operation, Mark was debriefed by his superiors. They commended his bravery and dedication to the mission, but acknowledged the toll it had taken on him. The decision on how to proceed with his future in law enforcement weighed heavily on their shoulders. For Mark's family, the revelation of his true identity and the dangers he had faced during the undercover mission were a shock. His wife, Sarah, struggled to come to terms with the deception that had shrouded their lives. The emotional wounds ran deep, and the path to healing would be long and uncertain. As the criminal organization's members faced trial and imprisonment, Mark's role in the operation was scrutinized. He had willingly compromised his own principles to gain the trust of the criminals, and his actions had been instrumental in the operation's success. But the line between undercover deception and moral compromise was a fine one, and Mark grappled with the consequences of his choices. In the end, Mark's superiors made a decision. He would not face disciplinary action for his actions during the undercover operation. Instead, he would receive counseling and support to help him cope with the emotional aftermath of the mission. It was a recognition of the immense sacrifices he had made and a commitment to helping him find his way back from the moral abyss he had traversed. As the days turned into weeks and the legal proceedings against the captured criminals continued, Mark embarked on a path of recovery. He attended therapy sessions to address the emotional trauma he had endured and to rebuild the trust and connection with his family that had been strained to the breaking point. The aftermath of the undercover operation was a time of reflection, healing, and reckoning for Detective Mark Turner. It was a journey back from the brink, a search for redemption, and a reminder of the profound impact that the pursuit of justice could have on those who dedicated their lives to it. In the wake of the successful sting operation and the apprehension of numerous members of the criminal organization, the law enforcement team turned its attention to the investigation of the elusive mastermind behind it all. While Victor, the second-in-command, had been a formidable figure, there was a belief that an even more cunning and powerful figure lurked in the shadows. Detective Mark Turner, still dealing with the emotional aftermath of the undercover operation, found himself drawn into the hunt for the mastermind. His intimate knowledge of the organization's inner workings made him a valuable asset to the investigative team. Although his role was now overt and transparent, his experience as Mark Sullivan was invaluable in deciphering the criminal empire's intricacies. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had been led by a figure known only as the Architect. The Architect had operated with extreme caution, leaving minimal digital traces and relying on a network of trusted intermediaries to communicate with lower-ranking members. Unmasking this enigmatic figure would prove to be a formidable challenge. The pursuit of the Architect led the investigators down a labyrinthine path of coded messages, encrypted files, and hidden financial transactions. It became clear that this mastermind had orchestrated the criminal operations with a level of sophistication that surpassed anything law enforcement had encountered before. As the pieces of the puzzle gradually fell into place, Mark's investigative instincts led him to a breakthrough. A seemingly insignificant detail from his time undercover, the mention of a mysterious contact known as Oracle, resurfaced in the course of the investigation. It was a lead worth pursuing, and Mark felt a deep personal connection to unraveling the mystery. With the team's support, Mark pursued the Oracle lead, tracing it to a shadowy figure who had played a critical role in facilitating communication within the organization. Under pressure, the Oracle agreed to cooperate, revealing the identity of the Architect, Alexander Voss, a reclusive and highly intelligent criminal mastermind. The unveiling of Alexander Voss as the Architect sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Voss had remained hidden for years, orchestrating criminal activities from behind the scenes, and his capture represented a significant victory against organized crime. The apprehension of Alexander Voss marked the culmination of the operation. Law enforcement agencies worldwide joined forces to track down and arrest this elusive criminal genius. The courtroom proceedings that followed would be a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice, with Mark as a key witness who could testify to the organization's inner workings. As the trial of Alexander Voss progressed, it became clear that the criminal empire had been dealt a crippling blow. Voss's intricate web of criminal enterprises unraveled, and the evidence gathered during the undercover operation played a pivotal role in securing his conviction. For Detective Mark Turner, it was a bittersweet victory. The mission had exacted a heavy toll on him personally and professionally, but it had also resulted in the dismantling of a powerful criminal organization and the capture of its mastermind. The pursuit of justice had come at great cost, but it had ultimately prevailed. As Mark looked back on the journey from undercover detective to key witness in the trial of Alexander Voss, he couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The unveiling of the mastermind was the final chapter in a story of deception, sacrifice, and the unwavering commitment to upholding the law. With the mastermind Alexander Voss behind bars and the criminal organization dismantled, the law enforcement community breathed a collective sigh of relief. The long and arduous journey that had begun with Detective Mark Turner's undercover mission had come to a close, and a sense of justice had been restored. For Mark, the return to normalcy was a gradual process, one that required mending the emotional wounds inflicted during the mission. He had witnessed the darkest aspects of the criminal underworld and had been forced to compromise his own principles to maintain his cover. The weight of those experiences would stay with him for a lifetime. One of the first steps in Mark's journey of recovery was to rebuild the trust and connection with his family. His wife, Sarah, had weathered the storm of deception and danger, and their relationship had been tested to its limits. Through therapy and open communication, they began the slow process of healing and rediscovering their shared life. Mark also sought solace in the camaraderie of his fellow officers. They had supported him throughout the mission, and their unwavering loyalty had been a source of strength. Together, they processed the events of the operation, reflecting on the sacrifices made and the significance of bringing down the criminal organization. The trial of Alexander Voss proceeded, revealing the extent of his criminal activities and the reach of the organization he had led. The courtroom became a battleground of legal prowess, with Mark testifying as a key witness. His testimony provided crucial insights into the inner workings of the organization, sealing Voss's fate. As the trial neared its conclusion, Mark found himself reflecting on the profound impact of his actions. His decision to reveal his true identity had been a turning point, one that had both exposed the criminals and laid bare his own vulnerabilities. It was a testament to the complexities of the world of undercover police work. The verdict was reached, and Alexander Voss was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The mastermind of the criminal organization would no longer pose a threat to society. It was a moment of closure, a vindication of the sacrifices made during the operation. For Mark, the return to normalcy also meant finding a new sense of purpose within the law enforcement community. The experience had changed him, deepening his commitment to upholding the law and ensuring that justice prevailed. He knew that his journey was far from over, and that the lessons learned during the undercover operation would inform his future actions. As he looked to the horizon, Detective Mark Turner knew that the path forward would be marked by a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to healing, and a determination to protect the world from those who sought to exploit it. The return to normalcy was a journey filled with challenges, but it was a journey that he was ready to embrace with unwavering resolve. With the criminal mastermind Alexander Voss behind bars, the legacy of the undercover operation began to take shape. The operation had been a journey marked by deception, sacrifice, and the unwavering commitment to justice, and its impact would resonate far beyond its conclusion. For Detective Mark Turner, the experience had left an indelible mark on his career and his life. It had tested his limits, forced him to compromise his principles, and ultimately led him to the revelation of his true identity in the pursuit of justice. The legacy of the operation was a reminder of the complexities of law enforcement and the moral dilemmas that officers could face. One of the enduring legacies of the operation was the dismantling of a powerful criminal organization. With Alexander Voss and many of its key members incarcerated, the organization's influence waned, and its criminal activities were curtailed. It was a victory for law enforcement and a testament to the dedication of those who had worked tirelessly to bring it down. The trial of Alexander Voss had set a legal precedent, showcasing the effectiveness of undercover operations in dismantling criminal empires. The legal system had been tested, and the evidence gathered during the operation had played a pivotal role in securing convictions. The legacy of the trial would inform future strategies in the fight against organized crime. Within the law enforcement community, the operation had inspired a renewed commitment to the pursuit of justice. Mark's story of deception and sacrifice served as a reminder of the dangers and challenges faced by undercover officers. It was a legacy that would inform the training and support systems for those who embarked on similar missions. The operation's legacy extended to the public as well. The successful takedown of a criminal organization offered a sense of security and justice to the communities affected by its activities. It was a reminder that law enforcement was dedicated to protecting the innocent and holding criminals accountable. As Detective Mark Turner looked back on the journey from undercover detective to key witness in the trial of Alexander Voss, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the role he had played. The legacy of the operation was a testament to the unwavering commitment of those who had stood against the criminal organization. The path forward was one of continued vigilance and dedication. While the operation had brought down a significant threat, the world of organized crime was ever evolving, and new challenges would arise. The legacy of the operation served as a reminder that justice required constant effort and unwavering resolve. In the end, the legacy of the undercover operation was a story of courage, sacrifice, and the triumph of justice over criminality. It was a reminder that the pursuit of justice was a journey fraught with challenges, but one that would forever be etched into the annals of law enforcement history.